Hello, welcome to Momentum. I'm your host, Robert Green. I'm happy to have you with us today. We're lucky today to be joined by Mr. Rob Wolz. Mr. Wolz is a professor of practice in our Department of Aerospace Engineering. Mr. Wolz earned his bachelor's degree in aerospace engineering from Mississippi State a couple of years ago, and then a Master of Business Administration from Georgia Southern University. So Rob, welcome. Glad to have you here.
Thank you very much. I appreciate the opportunity to sit here and talk with you.
Good. Well, I'm looking forward to it. I've had you come talk to my class several times, and they always like what you have to say, particularly with your industrial experience before you came back to academia. Tell us, how did you end up in choosing aerospace engineering?
Well, I'm a child of the space race, I guess. I grew up in the 60s, so there was excitement about what we were doing, sending men into orbit and then onto the moon. So that was definitely something that inspired me. My dad is also an Air Force officer and didn't fly for the Air Force, but he got his private pilot's license. So I got to fly around a lot with him when I was growing up. And you know, when I stepped foot on Mississippi State's campus, they made me pick a major. So I picked aerospace and said, well, I could change if I want to, but I never wanted to.
Yeah. Well, I'm going to date you and date myself as well. But, so we both were students here back in the 1980s, and now here we are in the 2020s, and you're back as a professor.
Yeah.
What are some of the most significant changes you've observed, both in aerospace engineering and engineering education in general, as well as in the profession?
Well, I think one of the biggest changes that I see is the number of students. I think my class size was probably about 16 in my aerospace engineering department and senior class. And now, a couple of years ago, I think we got close to 100 in the aerospace engineering class, and that's quite a change. The curriculum itself is very similar. We do, since I graduated, most of us were airplane people back when I was in school, but now almost half, if not more than half, are interested in space and astronautics. So the curriculum changed to put space-focused classes into the curriculum. Our design is broken down into aircraft design and spacecraft design. So, you know, there's a few more classes that emphasize the space program than when I was in school. But in terms of the basics, what you learn, the nomenclature, the language, it all seemed pretty familiar to me.
Yeah. Well, because I guess we do focus a lot on fundamentals here, and they tend to not change.
That's right.
The tools have certainly changed.
Well, that's definitely true. That's definitely true. I remember punch cards and carrying stacks of cards of my program to Allen Hall, I guess it was, to run those cards. The students don't know what I'm talking about now.
Understand job control language just to run a job.
That's right. That's right. And now they have their computers on the desks while I'm lecturing to them. So,
well, after graduation, obviously you went to work in industry. You spent some time working with Gulfstream, doing airplanes and acoustics and various other things, and then eventually decided to go back to school and get your Master of Business Administration. What possessed an engineer to go back and get a graduate degree in business?
Well, I was very fortunate in my career. As you said, I spent a number of years, just shy of 36 years at Gulfstream Aerospace. But I'd first say that while that's a little unique because a lot of people change jobs, my situation was that it was actually 4 different companies while I was there, 4 different ownerships. So it was unique in that aspect. I didn't have to move, but everything moved around me, and my job responsibilities changed over the years. So I started out individual contributor in technical areas and became more and more involved with other aspects of the business, and about, I guess, 10, 15 years into the business, I spent more time managing small groups, interfacing with our marketing department, interfacing with customers. So they gave me an opportunity to get my master's degree in business administration, and that's And they made it attractive for me.
Yeah.
I was able to work and do the graduate program at the same time. Every Friday evening and every Saturday all day for 2 years straight. So.
I think that's one of the good things about the engineering profession is a lot of times employers will help support you and pay for graduate education. But I know a lot of our students wonder, well, do I get a graduate degree? And if I do I get it right away, or do I get some experience? What was it like for you going back to school, having been out for a while?
You get that same question.
Yes.
I get that all the time. Yeah. And there's no unique answer or one single answer. But what it was like for me, I can still remember I was concerned. I hadn't been back in the classroom. I didn't know what that was going to be like. It was business school, so I hadn't had any prerequisite business classes. But it really was very enjoyable. I was with a group of students that were similar in terms of they were in business, different businesses. We had everything from a physician to a guy that ran his own construction company, a couple of us from Gulfstream. And we stayed together through that 2 years. So we learned from each other as well as learning from the faculty. And it was very enjoyable. The nervousness of going back to the classroom quickly went away, and I found out that this was an opportunity to learn. And I think my maturity changed, so I had a different focus.
Yeah, different outlook, a different perspective.
That's right.
Well, as you mentioned, I mean, we have aeronautics and astronautics, and I think when people think of aerospace engineers, they immediately think airplanes and rockets.
Which is true.
You spent a lot of your time, your career, working with acoustics, which I think is something they may not always associate with aerospace engineers. Tell us a little bit about that.
Well, when you think of an airplane, you have to think about a company that has to put together a system of systems. So it is very broad in terms of what it takes to make, whether it's a complicated airplane or spacecraft, all come together. So there's all sorts of disciplines involved. And I tell the students, in the aerospace industry, in particular, very few jobs get done by one person. It is very much a team effort. Yeah. So I did spend a couple of years initially in the acoustics group and did measurements inside and outside the airplane, analyzing vibrations, and it was interesting. I hadn't had all the training in acoustics though, so that was very much on-the-job learning. And then later in my career, I did several studies in supersonics. So actually did some work on sonic boom propagation, and that was an interesting part of my career as well.
Well, I think it's important what you said there, so I try to remind students of, part of what you're getting here, or in any engineering school as part of your education is not really what you need to know for the rest of your life, but what do you need to know to help you learn what you'll need to know for the rest of your life.
Absolutely, absolutely. And I think for me, coming back to the classroom, and I primarily deal with seniors, I let them know my own experience, feeling like I graduated, I'm an aerospace engineer, I know something. It doesn't take long for you to realize that I've got a lot to learn.
Got a lot to learn.
Yeah, and that learning continues, and that's one of my encouragements to the class is keep going. Yeah, you've got a lot ahead of you.
Well, you've clearly done the technical work. I mean, you're a project manager and several things, doing the technical side of the house. Then you also moved into management. Which one did you like best, or were they just different? You have a preference?
I don't know that I have a preference. I think my career, I was fortunate to do a lot of varied activities. In fact, when I chose to go to Gulfstream, I decided specifically to go to a smaller company rather than a much larger aerospace company, because I thought, hey, I'll be there a couple of years and I'll get to see a broader spectrum of things. And that proved to be true. I got to do a lot of different things in a lot of different areas. technically, and then as the years go by, you gain more experience. Your scope of influence goes from just your desk to your group's desk to your department to the whole company, and then outside the company. So all through that progression, I've enjoyed, or I did enjoy those interactions.
Well, I know you don't work for Boeing and never have worked for Boeing, but they've been in the news lately with some of the accidents with the Boeing 737 and, of course, Space Shuttle accidents in a while back. And a lot of those come down to some ethical issues. Can you share a few thoughts about the importance of ethics, not only in aerospace, but in engineering in general?
Well, I think in life, in your profession, in whatever you do, ethics plays a huge part of it. You have a responsibility basically not only to yourself, your coworkers, your employer, your suppliers, and the general public. So to me, it boils down to having standards, thinking about what those are, maintaining your standards, and really recognizing that all your decisions have an impact on those around you, and that you have to keep that in mind, and let those foundational principles guide you.
Yeah, I think that's important, that sometimes we're the last gatekeeper between us and injury to the public.
That is true, and you know, some of the toughest days that I had in industry were when things didn't go right, and we had to make tough decisions, and you had to put a stop to a process and say, hey, we've got to correct this. Yeah. It's not a very popular decision, but you know, it has to be done.
Yeah. Well, we got just a little bit of time left. So one of the questions I always like to ask is, you know, most engineering students say they know they're going to do math, but they probably don't think much about writing. Tell me, how much writing have you done in your career, and how important has that been to your progression throughout your career?
It's absolutely critical. Communications is a huge part of the engineering profession. You can have the best idea ever, but if you can't relay that to others, if you can't communicate the details of it, whether it's through graphical communications or writing or presentations, you're not going to go very far. You need that, and that's something that people need to realize. You know, we had a joke. I spent a lot of time making presentations, and PE usually means professional engineer, but PowerPoint engineer is also what we termed it as well, because we use that in the profession on a routine basis. That's how you communicate internally. Reports, documents, memos, all the time. Documentation is critical. And in the aerospace business, you need those breadcrumbs all the way through the design. Otherwise, you're going to plow that same field over and over if you're not saying, why did you make those decisions? And
well, Rob, I want to thank you for taking the time to join us today, and thank you for coming back to Mississippi State. I know the students enjoy hearing your perspective in the classroom coming from industry, you know, as well as academia. So thanks for joining us today, and I want to thank you all for joining us on this edition of Momentum, and look forward to seeing you next time.